In the first two parts of this series, I demonstrated my way of painting a still life. I also told the story of my loving lifestyle up to when my studio was located in Southern Ireland. There then followed a year during which I made a collection of paintings of the English market town of King's Lynn. The collection was exhibited during the town's art festival. The sculptor Enzo Plazotta also exhibited at the festival, and I was captivated by his bronze figure, the Jamaican Girl. 2 years later, we sailed a 30-foot ketch from England to the islands of her birth. My early Caribbean paintings were for the most part seascapes. My landscape paintings were made on return visits to my native West Riding of Yorkshire. The subtlety of the countryside of my youth was in sharp contrast to the vibrant colours of my adopted Caribbean. But therein lies the attraction and the challenge of setting one against the other. But wherever the location and whatever the subject, all my paintings are painted from life. I seldom work on a painting for longer than 20 minutes, and I resist making corrections afterwards. In the Caribbean, I labour under the heat of the tropical sun, whereas in England, I labour in the freezing cold of autumn. At times, my watercolor develops a film of ice, and mist shrouds my subject. But these trials and tribulations are what puts life into a painting. Rather than conspiring against me, the elements contribute, and in a way that a sterile photograph never can. The golden rule is to suggest rather than define. At a pinch, I can paint every leaf on a tree and every blade of grass, but it would be a boring business. Far better to do it with one bold brushstroke. If it is done well, the viewer will enter into the creative process and do the rest. And don't spend days searching for a grand subject. Van Gogh could make a painting out of a field of stubble. It's better to make a lot out of a little, and along the way to make hundreds of sketches. The painter John Constable valued his sketches more than the finished painting. He is quoted as saying, "I don't mind parting with the corn, but not with the field in which it was raised." On a tropical afternoon, I relaxed and painted this picture of the river that flows below my studio. In contrast, this is a sketch that I made of the same river in full flood. The American writer Charles Marvelli had this to say about those he terms painterly painters. The painterly painter uses the viewer's experience to give life to the work. Instead of being a passive receiver of information, the viewer becomes a participant. Painterly painters believe that an abbreviated style is best suited to capturing elusive effects. But although they consciously strive to develop a rapid execution, their distractors often criticize this characteristic, dismissing their work as little more than sketches. The painterly painters labour under a disadvantage, since their idea of finish is not that of the public at large. A watercolour is an accident waiting to happen, and working outdoors invites a succession of accidents, even before putting paint on the paper. The segment that follows is meant to show you the content of my sketch bag. But what with ants, forgetting things, and my drawing board falling over, it proved to be a comedy of errors, and we had to shoot the sequence 5 times. But like my painting, it is taken from life, and therein lies its value. So, let's see what we can do with a painting, but first of all, I'll show you what I've got in my sketch bag. First of all, the stool, which means I can now sit down. Next, the drawing board, which is of my own invention. It has a hinged leg, which means the leg goes down. The stool can either sit on my thighs or, more often, trapped between my legs. So I've got a little bit of a slope. So as I put the washes on, they can run into each other. The sketch bag itself, like the drawing board, is of my own invention. It's probably a Mark II or a Mark III, but over the years I modify them fractionally and they do wear out. I have a foam core pocket into which I keep my paper. So take a sheet of paper out, and somewhere down here we have the clips for clipping it onto the paper. On a windy day I've sometimes finish up chasing my paper into the bushes, but it's not too bad today. I think the next thing is, in this case here, which incidentally originally it dates from my engineering apprenticeship days. It contained welding rods. It was much longer. I cut it down and it now serves as my brush case. I have just 2 sable brushes. This one, well, they've both been with me for almost 50 years. 50 years certainly for this fella. It started as a number 12, but I think it's worn down to a number 10. This one, a number 14, a very rare. They're both sable. And with a good sable brush, you don't need any more than 1 or 2 brushes this size, because the brush itself, when it's wet, will come down to a point. And the same brush I use for a wash, I can use for a detail. Also in that brush case, I carry the charcoal pencil, or in this case a pastel pencil, with which I do my very, very quick initial sketch. And to sharpen that, here are my colors. This is my box of colors. Small Winsor & Newton artist colors. But in that box as well, somewhere if I dig down, where? Ah, there. I have a knife. Again, like everything else, it's been with me a long, long time, but it's a very, very sharp knife, and for charcoal or pastel pencils, they break very easily, and you have to sharpen them by guiding the knife with your thumb. If you try to just sharpen them like that, you'll be breaking them forever. But if you go very carefully, like that, and I didn't break it, okay? What I also carry somewhere down here is a little spray bottle which contains water. If I'm working in the tropics and it's very, very hot, the paper is very dry. Therefore, if I give it a light spray, not to wet it, but just to take the tension off the paper. Otherwise, when I throw down a wash, the wash will just want to stand there almost like a bubble of water. But if the paper is just gently, gently dampened, and only gently, it will then want to move on the paper, which is what I'm after. But that's just a tiny, tiny little spray bottle, nothing big. The water itself is here. Now, this bottle originally contained 1001 carpet cleaner. I eventually scraped the label off the bottle because when people were watching me paint, they used to say, "Oh, I know now how he does it. He uses carpet cleaner." But of course it's water. But the water goes in my 2 containers. 1 container, 2 containers. Next in line we have the paint box. If I can open it, yes I can. This is the paint box for tubes of colors, because you take a little bit of the color from the tube and put it into the various pockets. Over the years, I've got through at least 4 of these boxes. At the moment, I'm using 2. This one is the one I use for landscape, and I have another one which I use when I'm working with the figure, because of course the colors I need for the figure are a different set of colors altogether to the ones I use for the landscape. So there we have the paint box. We've got the brushes, and in my pocket here I carry some facial tissues. The whole idea of the tissues is, because I'm working wet when I throw the paint down, I want it to run down the page a little bit, but sometimes I need to catch it as it gets to the bottom, and that's what the tissue does. Before I forget, there's one important thing that I've yet to show you. It's somewhere in my paint box, and I tell you, without this, there's no way I could have spent a lifetime walking the rest of the Caribbean painting pictures. Where is it? It's there. Ha 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 ha, I've got it. It's a $5 bill. EC dollars, but $5 nonetheless. The reason for this is, after I've struggled with a painting in the heat of the sun, I can find the nearest shop and buy myself a cold beer. So now let's see if we can make a start on the painting itself, which is right across there. The subject of this painting is my wife's hen house. She was busy repairing it when I asked her to take a break and hold the camera. In the opposite direction, we have a fine view looking down the valley to the Caribbean Sea. But my task is not to paint what is commonly accepted as beauty, but to open your eyes to beauty where you least expect to find it. To avoid my demonstrations becoming repetitive and boring, I have edited down the content of this demonstration from 8 minutes to 5 minutes. But the essential lesson remains, that being, don't labor over details. Before I began the painting, I cleaned out the accumulation of old paint on my palette. But that was a mistake. What's left over from one previous session helps to subtly modify the colors for the next. I choose color by instinct, not by rule. The artist is free to rearrange the contents of a composition. For this painting, I left out the hills in the background and moved the blue tub further into the picture. When working from life, the scene is continually changing of its own accord. Whereas when working from a sterile photograph, everything is fixed. The process of painting involves creating an illusion, and the better the artist, the better the viewer is able to accept the illusion as reality. One brushstroke can serve for 1,000 leaves. Don't overcrowd a composition. Space has to be left for the viewer to enter into the creative process. A painting should not reveal all its secrets at first glance. Like poetry, it is what is left unsaid between the lines that counts. But my way of painting is a difficult message to get across. There are scores of watercolor groups on Facebook, but for the most part, they feature paintings that attract comments to the tune of, "Oh, how pretty," and "Oh, how sweet." In my early days, an accomplished artist told me my paintings were crap. At the time, I resented his remark, but eventually the truth of his comment sank home, and from then on, my work improved. Light and shade are essential components of a landscape, and in this painting, you will notice that I keep accentuating the darks. And just when I think I've overdone it, I find myself going back to strengthen the darks yet again. But although I can strengthen the darks, there is no way that I can lighten the lights. Highlights, which are in fact the white of the paper, have to be jealously guarded. I never resort to masking fluid. When occasionally my hat blocks your vision, it is because I need to get up close to place one color against the next. It requires intense concentration and a lifetime of practice. What may appear slapdash is in fact carefully controlled, albeit that it is done with the flick of a brush within the space of a second. The painting is now at a stage where I must resist going on and on. There comes a point when I have said all there is to say. To add more would distract from the initial vision. But if anything does need adding, I must do it now, while the subject is before me and the colours are still wet on the page. I never add to a painting once I've put it aside. I find it impossible to recapture that brief moment in time. But rather than say more, I will now leave you in peace to follow the final minutes of this painting.